Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Oasis Focus on Finance show. I'm your host Shafiq Morton, and as always it's great to be with you. In today's show we are going to have a look at the preservation of retirement funds, where you can effectively transfer existing retirement savings into a new fund. As always, we'll give you practical examples and make it as easy and accessible as possible to you watching us in the show. I welcome with me today Hassan, Motala and Ebrahim Rawoot. Gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Ebrahim, let's start off with you. What exactly do we mean when we say preservation fund? It's not something in a jar, is it?
No, certainly not, Shafiq. Preservation funds was really established, to safeguard one's assets when you ultimately want to retire. So, they say when you join a company, part of that employment contract is that you will belong to a company-sponsored pension or provident fund, and you'll contribute monthly through deductions from your salary towards your retirement savings. Now, when you terminate that contract, you've accumulated that retirement savings, and there are things that needs to happen to that savings. And ultimately, what you really want to do is preserve those savings, because your primary objective was, I want to ensure that I do retire comfortably one day. So, there are options, and we'll discuss it later in the program, but it's really about preserving that accumulation of wealth in its true form until the day of retirement. What is very important is that, certain companies do offer pension funds and certain companies do offer provident funds. So when you do preserve, it is a pension fund being transferred into a preservation pension and a provident fund that's being transferred into a preservation provident fund.
Hassan, give us a working definition of what a preservation fund exactly is. We know it's not in a jar now. Give us the mechanics.
It's good to always step back and understand why the need for preservation and who it impacts and how it impacts them. Now, we're living in an environment where things change on a daily basis. Times may be tough, economy may be tough, corporates face a bit of pressure. They may be forced to, make some hard decisions. And sometimes when you have these hard decisions, it could include, certain early retirement packages or retrenchments and the like. It could be that. That doesn't mean the people that are taking those packages or being retrenched, that they want to, or they obviously, they have no options in certain of those cases. But they still want to work in life. They still want to continue. There may be, for example, some of the big corporates in South Africa have gone through various types of retrenchments and restructure over the last couple of years. Includes the likes of Telkom, includes the likes of, more recently you're finding also some of the oil companies in South Africa, oil and gas companies are also going through that as well. So what does it mean? Basically it means that, for example, if you're being retrenched, or you decide, okay, there's another better option for me to pursue. I'm tired of maybe pursuing in this company or this type of, I want to pursue something else. But over the years, you may have worked for that particular company 10, 15, 20 years. And in each of those years, you've been contributing towards a provident or a pension fund. Now, over time, as you contribute monthly and the like, those contributions, provided they were in the right type of, but generally speaking, they should at least grow over a period of time relative to inflation as well. So they would have grown to a nice pool and a nice sum of money over that period of time. Now you decide, okay, I'm resigning, or you've been told, okay, you're being retrenched. What do you do with that pool? Because now many cases, you can't be part of that company's retirement fund because you're no longer employed by them. So what do you do with that money? You want to make sure that firstly, you preserve. The word preservation now coming in there, preserve that wealth which you've accumulated over a period of time. Very important. Secondly, and this is the mistake, unfortunately, many South Africans, but many people, in fact, from a global perspective do, is that when they retire, they want to try and dip their hands into that cookie jar and try and use it for other types of expenses and the like. You want to preserve that wealth. You want to make sure that when you do retire, and you do need that wealth to retire comfortably, that it's there for you. So that's why it needs to be going into a preservation fund, where it's preserved and continues to grow over a period of time. Now, as I said, it applies to people that resign, retrenched, in fact also people that may have an extended maternity leave. In this day and age, sometimes you want to look after your baby and then only go back to work after a period of time, after you make sure that your baby is in a certain position where you're comfortable leaving them with someone else. That's important as well. But again, leaving it in a preservation fund. Now, the preservation fund, obviously, very importantly, I think it's key points to highlight is, and I think Ebrahim will spend a bit more time around the cost and the options and the like, but there are various options available. The cost structures are very competitive, and very importantly, it allows you to preserve your hard-earned wealth for the time when you need it the most. And that's when you really retire. So preservation, not something in the jar that where we're preserving something. It's something where you're preserving your hard-earned wealth for the time when you need it the most.
Ebrahim, can you expand on the reasons why a person would migrate to a preservation fund?
Just to add on to what Hassan mentioned, preservation comes about as a result of various things. The common one is you resign and you look for, greener pastures. And as Hassan also mentioned, there are retrenchments that's taking place, people that are dismissed. So all those is a culmination of you now having this ability to access your retirement savings, but not physically taking that money in cash, but really porting it to a preservation fund that is going to allow for a comfortable retirement. So Shafiq, just to add, and maybe to really answer your question, there's really three areas that you need to look at. The one is, simplifying your finances, and I think that's quite important. And then, this sensitive topic that we always speak about, which is cost and, investment options, which I think, you need to place a lot more emphasis on. So if you look at simplifying your finances, remember you've been working for a company, you've been contributing to that pension provident fund. You never really had a choice as to what you could have done with it because it was just part of a contract. But you could have had accumulation of wealth with another provider, with another asset management company. Now that you are resigning and you have the ability to preserve your retirement savings, you can say, well, I want to really allow for everything to be under one roof. It makes it easier, it makes it more transparent from my perspective, and I have an existing relationship with a particular financial advisor. So simplifying one's assets, I think that is quite important. And then when you look at cost structure, you might only have worked for a company for a few years. So you have a very small retirement savings. So your negotiating power in terms of having reduced costs, afforded to you becomes a problem. But now you've got this large accumulation of wealth with another provider, you've got an existing relationship with that financial advisor, you might just get the benefit of a lower cost structure. But remember, there's also that saying that don't first question what you're paying for, first see what you're actually going to get out at the end of the day. And then investment options, which we'll go into a further detail, but that's also very important, Shafiq. When you were employed by that company, there might have been no choice as to, what the underlying investments are. Am I investing in a product that meets my ethical requirements? And Sharia becomes very important. Now that you have this opportunity to transfer out, you're actually transferring to a company that meets your ethical requirements, that meets your personal beliefs. And I think that is very, very important.
Ebrahim, just to add on to our previous question, let's say for argument's sake, I'm a 40 years old executive, I resign from my job or I want to go to another job. What exactly are my options?
I think, Shafiq, if you really want to define it, I think there's three options. The first option, which, unfortunately is the most commonly practiced option, is for me to take all that money in cash. So I tell my HR department and I fill in my withdrawal form that I'm electing the cash option. It's an easy option, but it's also what I like to refer to as a suicidal option, because you're now inviting the tax man to take a huge chunk of your retirement savings and you're actually coming out with a lot less. And that difference could be anywhere between 18 and 36% of what your pension wealth was. So the first option is I can take the cash. The second option is I've now resigned, but I'm employed by another company. Now, barring the fact that it's a like for like, so I'm exiting a pension fund, but I'm joining a new pension fund, I can transfer that money to my new employer retirement fund. It's a good option because I am preserving my retirement savings in its true form, so I'm not having to pay any taxes. But then there's also a limitation where that is concerned, because I'm now binding myself by the rules of the new retirement fund. So if that new retirement fund doesn't offer me the flexibility of, a Sharia mandate, or, the performance hasn't been that good, I'm not wanting to subject my previous employer retirement savings to that situation. So the third option by default now becomes your preservation fund, because you can stand back, you can say, well, I don't want to pay the tax, I am going to preserve, but I can explore all the preservation funds out there that is available to me, and I can say which one has consistently delivered performance, which one is offering me the mandate that is in accordance with my principles and my beliefs. So from having to take the cash option, which is a limitation and certainly a no-no, to transferring to your new company retirement fund, the preservation fund just becomes that perfect solution to making sure that you have a nest egg for you when you retire.
Hassan, let's get to you. What are all the alternatives that a person has in terms of this whole preservation fund investment landscape, bearing in mind we are in a Sharia-centric environment?
I think firstly and importantly, Ebrahim did allude to it earlier as well, is that when you're looking at preservation, taking into account whether you're coming from a pension fund or a provident fund, options are available to you. So that's very important. Firstly, whether a pension or provident, there are preservation funds that address your needs and your objectives. Now, very importantly, and Ebrahim had this example earlier where he talked about an executive in his 40s that is resigning and wants to move on. What are the options available to him or her? Firstly, very important, if you look at the person in their 40s, they've worked now for a number of years, so they've accumulated wealth for potentially, maybe 15, 20 years over that period, depending when they started. They've accumulated wealth over some period of time. They want to make sure that they preserve that wealth that they've obviously accumulated. But very importantly, they've still got another 15, 20 years before they retire. So it's still a long, relatively reasonable period of time before they do retire. So you've got options that are high, medium and low equity, which addresses different types of risk profiles. So for example, this person that's in their 40s, I would think that probably a more suitable type of option for that person would probably be the medium equity. The reason I say that is, firstly, as I said, the person's got probably another 15, 20 years before they do retire. So they can take a bit of risk, but not too much of risk. Now the medium option, what does it address? It addresses firstly your need to protect against inflation, because equity is still relatively reasonable proportion of the overall portfolio. So in the medium, you'll have generally about 50 to 60% of the portfolio will be an equity allocation. So that gives you a nice chunk in terms of equity, which is a fantastic protector against inflation. You're just going to go back over 20, 30, 40, 50 years and see how equity has done relative to inflation. You can see it's outperformed inflation by a reasonable measure. Secondly, you've got an allocation towards property. So again, you're getting another asset class which gives you sufficient protection against inflation over a period of time. So you've got equity, property, and now you've got a reasonable allocation towards income. Now income is the stabilizer, gives you a bit of stability, gives you that downside that you need. So I think the medium for that particular person would be appropriate. Now there are obviously various people out there that have different needs. So somebody that may be in their 20s or early 30s that decides, I want to move on. He or she may be working for a corporate and decides, hey, I've come up with a brilliant idea. I'd like to pursue this idea of mine and become an entrepreneur. But you've also accumulated 5, 10 years of wealth. You want to make sure that you preserve that while you're pursuing your career and pursuing your new opportunities that you're looking to address. In that person's case, being relatively young, having a much longer time horizon in terms of when they may want to retire, you want to pursue maybe the option of a high equity balance fund. So there you obviously have a higher allocation towards equity, a reasonable allocation towards property, and a smaller allocation towards income, because your profile is a higher risk profile. You can take a bit more risk, and you've got a longer term time horizon. Very important. Now the third option, and this is obviously from a risk perspective very important because many people in South Africa are impacted by this. those that are particularly 50 plus. You know, they've worked for a number of years, 25, 30 years, they've been working hard, you know, blood, sweat, tears, they've saved up. They want to make sure that that wealth that they've saved and accumulated over a period of time, they want to preserve it for their retirement. So when they retire, they can retire comfortably. Now in those cases, you want to make sure that that wealth has a higher element of protection for protecting from a capital perspective. Now the low equity balance fund addresses that need and objective, because firstly, you've got an allocation towards equity that's up to a maximum of around 40%. So you limited it, but so you're getting equity, you're getting some that protection against inflation, but it's limited to around 40%. Then you're still getting a reasonable allocation towards property, but a higher proportion of the fund will be in income. So around 40, 45, maybe even up to 50% would be allocated towards income. So that gives you that stabilizer. So when markets may be a bit volatile, that gives you that downside protection and stabilizes your fund and your portfolio. And that's very important. So I think the low equity balance fund for somebody that's, as I said, in their 50s, a shorter time horizon, they're going to have maybe 5, 10 years before they retire. So you want to have a higher limit. The low equity balance fund addresses that need and objective of that particular person. Now, one very important point you highlighted, obviously working toward, you said within a Sharia compliant paradigm. We are living in South Africa, a democratic country. Alhamdulillah, we're giving many options. And one of the good options that we're given is that we can invest our hard-earned wealth in a manner which is aligned to our principles, which is our Sharia principles, our ethical principles. Now, there are many funds out there that address that, but particularly if you look at the Oasis Crescent funds, they're pure Sharia compliant funds that addresses those needs and objectives, but also importantly, derives superior performance over a period of time. And I use one example, the high equity fund, which has now around a 15-year track record, has delivered a return of around 14% per annum over 15 years. And if you compare that to inflation over that period of time has been around, I think, 5.6, 5.7%. That's a massive outperformance of inflation over 15 years. The person that invested in that fund since inception sits comfortably when they retire, because they can retire living a life which is a better standard of living and a comfortable standard of living, and therefore they can live comfortably during their retirement years.
Right. Now, Ebrahim, Hassan has given us something of the broad range of products, but tell us something more specific about the actual performance within the range that we're talking about.
Certainly, Shafiq, but maybe just to add on to what Hassan mentioned, he spoke about this high equity, high risk, medium equity, medium risk, low equity, low risk balanced portfolios. And I think that's really what it is. It's about satisfying the risk profiling and the life staging model of every one of us out there, because we must not for 1 minute believe that, because I'm young, that I can afford to be aggressive. Yes, you want to ensure that you beat inflation over the long term, but very importantly is having that connection with your financial advisor to be able to guide you, to be able to assist you, and ultimately recommend a product that is going to best suit you over the next 5, 10, maybe even 20 or 30 years that you are going to be investing. Then coming back to that performance, Hassan mentioned to you about the high equity portfolio, north of 14% return over a 15-year period. If you look at your moderate or progressive portfolio, that portfolio has given you a 12% return since inception. Your stable or low risk portfolio has given you 11.5% return since inception. So taking these performances and using inflation as your benchmark, all these funds have significantly outperformed and created significant real wealth to its investors. And what it ultimately gives you is that ability to be able to retire comfortably when that opportunity and that day does arise. Lastly is the ability to say, well, it's not only about performance, it's about risk profiling, and then, what I like to refer to as the cherry on top is the ability to satisfy your requirement, and that is your principal beliefs, your ethical rights, your moral obligations, and these three preservation funds are there to be able to bring that to the table.
Hassan, let's go on from what Ebrahim is saying. Let's say our 40-year-old has resigned, he or she wants to open up a business, but there is this retirement fund sitting neatly in some account. What's the practical approach?
I think very importantly, it's important to speak to a financial advisor. You know, he or she takes you through the process in terms of firstly exploring your options, understanding your needs and objectives, and then exploring the options available that can meet those needs and objectives. Secondly, and very importantly, we need to make sure that you follow the process and procedures relating to transfers from a pension or provident fund to a preservation fund. Now, obviously, to do that, you need to follow, there's rules and requirements laid out by SARS or the receiver of revenue. You need to make sure that you need to follow that process and get the necessary approval and requirements to do that transfer. You know, you want to make sure that you do it by the books, so that importantly, you know, you can sit comfortably and know that the transfer took place in line with the necessary rules and regulations, and you don't have to worry about any other issues later on. So following the rules and regulations related to transfers, getting the required approvals, and ensuring that the transfer is done appropriately from your pension and provident funds to the preservation fund.
Now, Ebrahim, you're a consultant. You've walked numerous clients through this particular process. So from your side, what are your words of advice?
I think, you know, what is very important, and, you know, we mentioned it previously, is that I think you need to sit down with your financial advisor. If you are going to resign, you know, Shafiq, you don't wake up Monday morning and you're leaving the offices Monday afternoon. You know, there's a process. If
that's called being fired.
I suppose so. And, you know, even then, if you are being retrenched, there's a process that you follow. So there's sufficient time within which you have to be able to think of all your options that's available to you, for you to have made sufficient time and engaging with your financial advisor before you actually make that decision. Don't for 1 minute believe that I am going to be resigning and, you know, I tick off the option of cash. I've been sitting with R1 million in my pension fund. I now leave the employment. A few weeks later, after the tax directive has come through, the employer only pays out 800,000 in my bank account. Don't complain. Why? Because I did not sufficiently take the right process to be able to say, did I actually think all the options through? And, you know, that difference of 20, 25, 30%, it significantly impacts on your ultimate end result, which is, am I going to be able to retire comfortably? So I think the message out there, Shafiq, is very simple. You know, engage with your human resource department, ask him what documentation, what paperwork is required, and then match that with what your financial advisor is telling you, and that then becomes a painless, you know, free, simple process to be able to transfer your pension and provident fund into a preservation fund. And then, you know, really what is important is we must become proactive. You know, Shafiq, don't for 1 minute believe all these things are just going to happen because I'm resigning and I'm moving on to my new company retirement fund. HR doesn't know what you want to do with your monies. And if that money just by default lies in your bank account, inflation comes in, eats a little bit of it, and ultimately it impacts on performance, it impacts on the quality of one's life. So the message really out there is engage with a financial advisor quite early in the process, whether it's 2 months, 3 months, maybe even people know a year before, I've got that brilliant idea, I just need to know when to pursue it. But again, having the ability to engage and making sure that this decision that you make is going to benefit you in the long run.
Ebrahim and Hassan, thanks for chatting to us about the preservation of retirement funds and, of course, the path to financial freedom. Thanks.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of the Oasis Focus on Finance show, during which we focused on preservation funds and the ability that you have to put your retirement savings into a new fund. Our special guests were Hassan Motala and Ebrahim Rawoot. Should you wish to watch this or any of our other shows, you can log into the Oasis Crescent YouTube channel. Or should you wish to contact us, you can dial 0860 100 786 or email info@oasiscrescent.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Shafiq Morton. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.